This is Touhou, the Lost Branch of Legend. So if you're not familiar, of course, Touhou is a pretty legendary series of bullet hell shmups that is available on PC. Has been for a long time, it's been going since the 90s, and it has a very, very large fan base, like roughly half the planet. And it's fairly unique among things like this because its creator has actually given the go-ahead for people to make fan games commercials, so you can actually make money off of your own Touhou games despite not actually being official Touhou shmups. So there are tons and tons of Touhou games all over the place, and they can often be quite good in my opinion. I'm actually a fan of the universe. I think it's sort of neat and very silly and just a colorful fun time, so I do enjoy the games myself, and a lot of the side games, or the fan games in this case, can also be really enjoyable. Now, this one in particular is a deck builder that plopped onto early access relatively recently, but at the time it was not available in English. There was a modded fan translation into English that was happening for a while, and the devs liked it so much they actually picked it up and made it official. And just recently, the sort of first draft of this translation has actually come out onto early access for people to try out, and it's like 98% done. Almost everything is translated, and the translation is, in my opinion, really good. So it is now a completely playable game in English, and that's exactly why I wanted to take a look at it now. The plot is there has been a theft at a museum opening or a museum tour, and the artifact known as the Jeweled Branch of Legend itself has been stolen right out from under them, and it is your job in classic Touhou fashion to resolve the incident, to figure out who stole it and why. And knowing these games, it's probably because they wanted to like dress it up and make a little Christmas tree out of it or something. That's just sort of how these games go. And you will choose your character and head out on a multi-branched adventure, and there are 5 characters that are going to be in the game, although 3 of them are available right now. The other 2 are currently unavailable. So the 3 that are available currently are Reimu and Marisa, of course, and also Sakuya, the time-stopping maid of the Scarlet Devil Mansion. The other 2 characters that will be in the game later are Cyrno, or Chirono, or something like that, I think is how you say it. I've never actually heard anyone pronounce it out loud. The Stupid Ice Fairy. And the other one is Koishi, which is kind of interesting because you don't see her very often in fan games like this, so I think it's kind of neat that she's gonna get some spotlight eventually when she's put into the game. And the game uses a very Magic the Gathering-like mana system where there are 5 different colors of mana, and cards can cost all the various different colors as well as colorless mana to actually play them. And every character represents 2 different colors, and they will have 5 mana total to start with, although they can get more than that later as you're playing them. And each character also has 2 different sort of starting decks that you can choose from. Although it's more than just a deck, it's also a starting artifact, and it determines which of the 2 colors they represent they'll have 3 of, because if they have 5 mana, that means they have to have 3 of one and 2 of the other. I have a feeling this is kind of like a callback to the usual, like, Reimu A and B, Marisa A, B, and C, that kind of thing, that usually each of the playable characters in like mainline Touhou games has several different shot types that they can be, so I think this is this game's version of that. And I've noticed that each of the 2 character variants for each one, they actually play quite a bit differently, so it isn't really just a starting deck, it's actually almost like an entire playstyle difference. And you have a classic Slay the Spire style node-based map where there are different fights and shops and other things that can happen, and you just sort of click on the nodes and move from piece to piece in order to get through each of the individual levels themselves. And as you go along, you'll of course be fighting all kinds of enemies, classic enemies for Touhou games, lots of fairies and Tengu and things like that. There are also elites, which can actually be some more important characters, like you'll find Yumu, for instance, and Aya from Shoot the Bullet is also there. There's also shops, and you will be gaining money after each battle as well as from other random events, and the shops have quite a bit of stuff to do in them. There are always 3 different exhibits, which we'll get onto in a minute. There are a couple of consumable cards that you can pick, and a whole host of like 8 cards that you can pick from as well for your main deck, and one of these will also be heavily discounted every time you visit. So there's definitely a lot to do. There's also a card removal service, but you can only use it 1 time per shop. It starts at 50 of the monies, and it will go up by 25 every time you use it. So it does get more and more expensive, but of course, in a deck builder, card removal is meant to be a very valuable thing. You also have a spell card as each character. In fact, each character has 2 different spell cards depending on which of their starting decks you choose, and these gain power as you destroy enemies. It uses the same classic like Touhou P-shaped power-ups. And once you get 100 of these, you can use your spell card. And they tend to be very powerful effects, as you would expect, and they are often classic spell cards that those characters are known for. So Sakuya has things like Killing Doll, and Marisa has, of course, her Master Spark, for instance. Interestingly, you can actually hold more than 100 power, though. You can actually hold up to 200, which lets you just, store 2 full uses of the spell card whenever you need it, although you can only use it once per turn if you do have the full charge. But the really cool thing about the combat in this game is how visual it is. They've gone out of their way way to make a ton of different like Danmaku styles, so all of the attacks actually fire out bullets of various kinds, and each card looks different. I mean, like, all of the cards have their own unique attack patterns and things. Enemies have their own patterns. Bosses actually have their own spell cards that are reminiscent of the things they can do in the mainline games and stuff like that. They've put a ton of effort into the visuals of this game, more so than is normal for a deck builder. You know, normally in a deck builder you just get basic animations for your attacks. They're just small, simple particle effects that go off really quick and aren't really meant to be super flashy because they're just really simple. But in this case, they've actually gone out of their way to simulate like a Danmaku spell card battle. So you have tons of projectiles all over the screen, and it looks really, really cool. And I think they've done an absolutely fantastic job of making all of the different bullets and things for all of your cards look really neat. This means that it feels familiar if you've played something like Slay the Spire, but is like an absolute visual feast with all sorts of colorful things happening on screen, and some really cool bullet patterns and some pretty lasers and all sorts of things to look at. And it's just really neat that they've actually managed to make every single card have its own animation and its own particle effects and things. And they've even gone out of their way to use sound effects and things that match what these should sound like in the mainline game. So there's been a lot of effort put into the audiovisual presentation of this game to make it very Touhou-like. Mechanics-wise, it has pretty much all the stuff that you would expect. A lot of your damage versus defense. You'll always know the enemy intent, so you're encouraged to, you know, build up your block to prevent them from hitting you, and then lash out with your own damage. There's quite a few different keywords and card mechanics to be aware of. There's also some Touhou-specific stuff like graze, for instance. In the mainline Touhou games, grazing is just when you pass through a very narrow opening of bullets and your hitbox sort of grazes the side of them, and it's a way to increase your score a lot. But in this game, it's sort of like an avoidance buff, that one stack of graze will protect you from one barrage of projectiles, and then your block and barrier remains for the rest. So there's definitely some Touhou flavoring to the combat, and where it really shines is how different all of the characters actually play. Every character has their own unique cards that are exclusive to them, as well as a large pool of neutral cards that anyone can take. And their mechanics are just really fun. Like, it's a blast to play through this game just because of how fun they've made the characters to play. Like, for instance, Marisa, who is my favorite character to play so far. Red mana Marisa is all about crazy burst damage, and gathers this charge by playing most of her cards, and when she reaches 8 charge, she goes into burst, which gives her some Philosopher's Mana to spend, which is rainbow that can be spent on anything, and it also doubles her damage until the end of the turn, which is ridiculous. So you can use that to set up like huge burst damage combos for like triple-digit damage. But then you have Black Mana Marisa, who is completely different. She can still use charge stuff if you purchase a bunch of charge cards for her to use, but she's more about scrying, a lot of card draw, milling your deck really fast, and having a ton of unstable potions, which are cards that give you a rainbow mana to spend as well as do random damage whenever they're actually drawn. They're sort of used automatically, and the whole point of like Black Mana Marisa's kit really is to take advantage of having tons and tons of unstable potions, milling your deck really fast, and having loads of these effects go off at once all automatically, and just like randomly distribute damage throughout the whole enemy team and stuff. And it makes her really fun to play too, and this is the case for all of the different characters. So far, all 3 of them, they have completely different playstyles, and each of their 2 different mana focuses, their 2 starting decks, are really neat, but also very different from each other, which means there's a lot of variety and versatility in the actual gameplay of this game. So even though it is an audiovisual feast, to be sure, it also has loads of really fun mechanics that make the characters actually really enjoyable to play. And I've managed to play all the way through the main campaign several times now and unlock some other cards and exhibits to use. Oh yeah, I should probably explain exhibits, huh? So every one of these games, like a Slay the Spire style deck builder, has items, right, that have various passive effects, and you want to gather these items to make yourself more powerful, but different games do them differently. Like Slay the Spire, they're very specifically useful. They tend to be for very certain builds, so you want like a synergistic set of items that apply specific bonuses to your character and what they're currently doing, like tons of poison and stuff like that. Some games in this genre instead make them very general, so that they're just kind of useful for a lot of different builds at once, but they're less individually powerful. This game decides to make them really, really powerful. They're called exhibits to keep up the whole museum theme, and they're very strong items. Even the more basic ones can do things like giving you a rainbow mana to spend at the beginning of every turn, or giving you graze at the beginning of your second turn automatically, and stuff like that. So even like the most common rarity ones still have quite powerful effects, but the legendary rarity ones have pretty ridiculous effects, like making all of your attacks accurate, which means you can't be grazed at all, so you basically can never miss again once you take that one. They can also add colored mana to your pool and give you access to a different character's exclusive cards, so you can actually have, like, say, Reimu's cards as Sakuya if you want to, and actually build a deck including both characters' cards to come up with some sort of crazy, ridiculous build. And that point right there is where I feel the game really shines. It allows you to be overpowered. It lets you create a synergistic set of crazy circumstances and be super strong, which I think is kind of in the Touhou spirit, right? Like, these characters are meant to be, like, absurdly powerful to kind of a silly degree, so allowing yourself to do ridiculous things like kill an entire screen of enemies with, like, one card is really fun. And that doesn't mean the game isn't challenging. It is, especially on hard and lunatic difficulties where things get pretty ridiculous, as you would expect, but it means the game doesn't feel too static, right? Too limited. Everyone has several different mechanics that they can lean on depending on how you actually want to build them this time, and you'll also have multiple opportunities to start getting various neutral cards and other characters exclusive cards that can complement that particular build you're going for and make it different this time. So every time you play, it really does feel like you're getting a bit of a different experience, and I appreciate that because sometimes these games can get very static feeling where it feels like a character has the one thing, right? That one mechanic that they do the best and that you should always build as much as possible. But in this game, it feels like every character has several, and there are ways that you can just experiment and go crazy and still be successful. The music as well, I should also mention, because Touhou is known for its music, the music is great, and several of them are actually remixes of popular songs or songs that you'll know if you've played the mainline games. Like, for instance, Necrophantasia is actually, or a remix of it is the sort of menu music. And I think also the game feels extremely polished. It has a lot of quality of life stuff, a lot of really nice stuff that makes it feel like it's a very polished game despite being in early access. And I think the reason that it feels this way is they've held back on the stuff that isn't polished instead of putting it into the game, so that the game looks like it has less content, like, for instance, only 3 characters instead of 5, but in exchange, all of the stuff that is currently in the game is highly polished feeling and feels really basically finished. Like all of the crazy Danmaku that you can shoot that's different for every single card, or how some of the cards actually react and change their colors of how the projectiles look depending on the colors of mana that you spend for them, or the ability to just click your mana to spend it in a specific order. If you want cards to use a certain amount but not others, you can actually just click and right-click the various mana orbs on the left side of the screen to actually sort of queue them up for spending. Just little things like that, little details that make this feel like it's made by people that really like this genre and understand it a lot and have created what is already a very polished experience because of that. I wholeheartedly recommend this personally. It's actually become one of my favorite Slay the Spire-like deck builders in recent memory because, for one, I just like the theme a lot. Touhou is fun to me, but also it's just such a cool, polished feeling game that's really enjoyable to go through, and it has quite a bit on offer already, so I'm definitely excited to see what the other characters are like to play, and I'm excited to see what the inevitable resolution of some of this stuff is actually going to entail, because I'm sure it will be very silly. As for things that I would like to see personally, aside from just those other characters that aren't in the game yet, the one thing that I would suggest is mod support. I think this game needs Steam Workshop support because, for one, it's a Touhou game, right? Which means that it's going to have tons of loving fans when it comes to people that want to make new content for it. So if you give them an outlet to do so, you will get that new content, right? I can see people making their favorite characters with some fun decks to play and putting them on the workshop, so you could play as Yumu and Utsuho and Remilia and all those like fan favorite characters. So I think it would be a really, really genuinely fantastic idea to have workshop support integrated into this game by the time that it officially launches 1.0. I think it'd just be a really smart move, knowing the passion that the Touhou fan base has, and knowing how fan games like this tend to go. I think it would be just really smart and also really, really fun to have, because people would make some impressive things. I can guarantee you right now, people would be making their own favorite characters and all sorts of new decks and new items and all sorts of things, and it would be a really great time. So I think that of all the things that I could think of to add to this game, it would be workshop support. So that's my current view on Lost Branch of Legend. I think it is a fantastic Slay the Spire-like game that helps to push the audio-visual aspect of the genre forward a little bit and has a really fun theme and some just characters that are a blast to play, a lot of freedom in building and gaining power to like absurd degrees and stuff like that. So yeah, easy to recommend. I will put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page if you wish to check it out yourself, or indeed just wishlist it to keep an eye on it as it develops. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.